Okay, you're live.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever in the heck in the world you are. It's Monday. It's 10 a.m. over here on the eastern seaboard of the United States. And you know what time it is. It's time for the Sirius report with none other than London Paul. And guys, here's the deal. If you haven't done so already, go to thesiriusreport.com, get on the exclusive subscriber list. It's for less than a price of a Starbucks latte per month. You can get on the special subscribers series report where you get your daily intelligence briefings directly from Paul. You have that exclusive options. These are things that Paul doesn't even discuss anywhere else. So you want to get it on the inside track of what's going on geopolitically, globally, economically. You need to subscribe. With that being said, Paul, how are you, buddy?
Well, good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. Yeah, I'm fine. And yourself?
I'm hanging in there, man. It's Monday. It's the beginning of the week, and so many things are happening. So many things are starting to become clear, especially the situation in Qatar, and all these other things that are happening throughout the world, man. So wherever you want to take us, Paul, I'm ready. I'm
Okay.
strapped in. I got my seatbelts on. I got my popcorn ready, and let's do this.
Okay, let's start with Qatar. I mean, I have in the podcast covered off a huge amount of stuff in the last week, but what's interesting is if you look at the whole Saudi kind of standoff against Qatar, you're already seeing, I mean, it's the most ill-conceived, stupid thing that Saudi's ever done. And in the process, and we'll talk about this in detail, it's become a serious threat to Riyadh's own kind of prominence and security in the Middle East. So not only is it backfired on them in that respect, but it's actually backfiring on them personally. Now, of course, as ever, the timing of everything is always important, and it's from my perspective, there's no coincidence, that Riyadh decides to suddenly launch this offensive against Qatar after the visit of Trump. Um, and I think what it is, they saw that as a signal that you've got issues with Qatar. We're going to, Trump's over. He's obviously fully supporting us. So they saw that as a signal. Washington would back them, come what may, and then ultimately against Iran. Now, of course, the plan's coming off the rails for three main reasons, and that's Russia, Turkey, and Iran. And we know Russia's playing this very diplomatic role. Turkey's been slightly more offensive. We'll go into some more detail about the whole Turkey-Saudi relationship. And then you've got Iran, who's actually thus far been very diplomatic, saying, look, there needs to be a diplomatic solution. But, if Iran has to, there'll be, and it ever came to a war, Turkey or Iran, as we said before, would steamroller into Saudi and it'd be the end of the war. I mean, very, very rapidly. But the fact is, we know that Saudi's been backing extremist groups all over the world. And Syria is one great example. They've got this insane war in Yemen, basically because Saudi wants the old leadership back in power who are pro-Saudi. But the fact is, with the Saudis, they've got never will have any military strategy whatsoever. As demonstrated by Yemen, it doesn't detract from the fact they've killed a lot of people and caused a lot of mayhem and bloodshed and death and destruction, but they don't have any proper strategy. They're geopolitically extremely naive because they thought they'd get a bunch of GCC nations, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and think they were going to steamroller Qatar. And as we said, they've met formidable resistance from Iran, Turkey, and Russia. Now, of course, the Saudi and the UAE are going to repeat the same mistakes that were made when obviously the Saudi leadership decided to launch a war in Yemen. They had the same attitude, we've got no problems. We'll just steamroller in, it'll be all over in no time. And they haven't learned that lesson. So consequently, they've just gone in and said, okay, well, we can do the same. I'm not sure how much the UAE are thinking this is a great idea anymore, but of course, the Saudis are sat there going, well, what do we do? Well, they've got no political strategy. They've made a massive load of completely incorrect and erroneous assumptions regarding Qatar and what would happen, incurring financial costs through this because there's always blowback when you start doing the kind of insane political and economic decisions they've made. And of course, the problem is their own security is now at risk. And is it any coincidence? I mean, in light of this whole bundle failed affair, that ISIS is now issuing threats to attack Saudi. They came out the weekend and started to threaten the House of Saud that they'd go after them. Well, there's never any coincidences. And of course, why? Well, the thing is as well is that initially, of course, Trump backed the Saudis. And then obviously the Pentagon's kind of taking Trump to one side and going, hang on a minute, what the hell are you doing here? And then he backs off.
Yeah.
And then Tillerson comes out and says, well, this blockade needs to end. We need to find a political, and diplomatic solution. Of course, the Russians have said exactly the same, that this whole crisis needs to be resolved through negotiations. And what do we find? After Tillerson said this blockade needs to end, that's after he's had a conversation with Lavrov,
Yes.
which they had at the weekend. And and it was a joint statement, effectively along the lines of, we're ready to promote such efforts and work towards it. But the one thing we do know is that Washington were involved initially because we had this US media saturation talking about Qatar as this sponsor of terrorism, and this is the reason why, of course, well, always the justification for Saudi and the GCC nations who were they weren't exactly thrilled. They were dragged along in this sense of perverse unity with Saudi. Now, of course, the thing that's confusing for the Qataris is that, they considered, Trump's statements when he was in Riyadh to be particularly strange after years of military cooperation between Doha and Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, so that kind of makes the stupidity of what Trump said, even more glaringly so, because Qatar can quite easily point to the fact, well, we've had this cooperation. For goodness sake, Washington, you've got your biggest military base in the Middle East in our nation. What are you talking about? But the one thing is, and this is the ultimate failure from the Saudis' perspective, they genuinely, I think, believed that the US would militarily defend the kingdom's borders. Now, they have huge borders, as we know if you look at the map of Saudi Arabia.
Yes,
now, the House of Saud now realizes, well, it's on its own. It's got to defend its own borders. Well, here's the problem. You've got Qatar in the east. Okay, it's a small border, but if there was ever a war, you could have got, as we said, Turkey and Iran. You've got Yemen in the south. Now, the fact is, of course, you've got Iraq in the north, and if ever it really got out of hand, the Iranians can not only just come through the east through Qatar, because there's only that short distance across the ocean to get from Iran to Qatar. They could go through Iraq, because Iraq and Iran are getting on, having pretty good relations now. So they could attack from the north. You've got Oman in the south as well, because of course the Omanis, there's no love lost between them and the Saudis. So, and they're also underestimated, obviously, how the Turkey would react. Now, it's no surprise that Turkey and Saudi absolutely hate each other with a vengeance.
Oh, yeah.
Of that, that's pretty obvious. So that was the fly in the ointment, that they never kind of thought through this and thought, well, Turkey will never back the Qataris. Now, of course, you mentioned it earlier, you've got this thing where Tehran's now saying as well, we can prove that the US directly supported Daesh. We've got all the evidence. Well, undoubtedly, they have, more like the Russians have had it and have used it in the past against the deep state stroke cabal in terms of warding them off from doing certain things by saying, well, if you do that, we'll just tell the world exactly what you've been doing. So, and as everyone says, well, why don't you just go out there and tell the world what these people are doing? But it's better to have that information as the kind of sword of Damocles to hang over the cabal and say, well, if you persist in doing this or you threaten to do this, we'll expose it. Never play your hand unless you have to. And rather like the Russians having it, clearly the Iranians have it. And I think the reality is these GCC nations who have notionally backed Saudi are now starting to go, do you know what? Iran really isn't the threat. They're not a threat like it's been made out. They're not these big sponsors of terrorism. This is all just a complete fabrication by the West and by the Saudis. Now, of course, from Saudi's point of view, they see Turkey and Qatar now as a threat, but they're also fearful of the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood again, which we know is our Western creation. Now, of course, what do we have at the weekend as well? We have the Islamic State, who obviously there was two incidents in Tehran. I think there was at least 17 people killed. Now, they, as I said just prior, they released this video before the attack on Tehran, saying they were going to threaten the Shiites in Iran as well as the Saudi Arabian government, basically meaning the House of Saud that, your turn's coming. And obviously the turn of the Iranians came by that attack. And of course, the thing the Iranians won't do is they won't mess around like we do in the West. They just deal with the matter, and there's going to be serious repercussions because rightly they say, as far as we're concerned, the Saudis are behind this attack.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
But then, as you say, we've got to look even further into this. And the whole point I said is that, the Saudis despise Erdogan. And whilst there's no evidence that the Saudis were involved in the coup last year to remove him, there's no doubt the Saudis would have been, rubbing their hands with glee if Erdogan had gone.
Right.
And of course, how you know there's this tit for tat problem is 24 hours after Turkey was, so we're sending troops to protect Qatar. What do the Saudis come out with? Public support for the Kurds in Syria. I mean, it can't be any more obvious than that. That there's this massive disagreement on beneath the surface between those two nations, because of course the one thing that's going to really irritate Erdogan is anybody supporting the Kurds in Syria. Now, of course, in the process, Trump's inadvertently thrown the Saudis under the bus because obviously Erdogan went to Washington, and you could see from the body language of the meeting, basically Erdogan came away from that meeting with absolutely nothing. So he realizes, look, I'm trying to mend bridges. There was the old U.S. administration. Okay, they were in far as he's concerned, there was CIA involvement in overthrowing him, but I'm going to try and mend bridges. He's gone there and realized it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
So he rotates east. But finally goes, well, the Russians say me, I'm trying to build an olive branch. What a waste of time. I'm going to fully rotate east, which is now why he's defending Qatar, which weakens the Saudis in the process.
Yeah.
And
Which
there's
weakens the
no doubt,
cabal.
yeah, which weakens the cabal, exactly. And there's no doubt part of the reason Erdogan didn't get any concessions from Trump is because precisely if he had, Riyadh would have been on the phone going, well, hang on, what the hell are you doing? Because remember, Erdogan's a threat to us. So what's happened in all this? Erdogan's profile in the region's risen hugely. He's now the ally of Iran. And if he does indeed support a resurrection, I don't suggest he will, of the Muslim Brotherhood, that's going to pose an even bigger risk to Saudi. So in Saudi's stupid, ridiculous, intransigent attitude and their behavior, all it's done is given Erdogan more ammunition in the Middle East, makes him stronger, therefore more of a threat to Saudi. So this is why this whole backlash is coming back on Saudi Arabia. Now, of course, we've got to factor in Russia into the equation because they're not exactly too happy if Erdogan comes stomping all over the Middle East, because the whole basis is that there needs to be some proper reconciliation and resolution of problems diplomatically, not having another war in the Middle East. But no doubt Erdogan will have had a phone call saying, hang on a minute, you need to rein your neck in. Yes, I know we kind of know what you're doing, but nations are now looking at Saudi and questioning, as we said, the rhetoric with Iran. But as we know, internally, Saudi is extremely weak. So what do nations often do in times when they're weak? They look to create a bogeyman. And what a better case than Iran, because Trump's been on the bandwagon about Iran. So therefore, we'll just join the party and blame that. Now, the irony is, despite the UAE's alliance with Saudi, they don't want to follow through. They want to keep doing their trade deals and keep the pipeline open with the Qataris, because otherwise the UAE will go dark. And if their trade deals fail, they've got serious financial issues as a result of that, because they do a lot of trade with Iran. Now, obviously, ultimately, you look at all this and go, well, what the hell was Saudi's real problem with this? Because, well, yes, arguably they're completely stupid and didn't think any of this through. But I think the other part is, by all accounts, when the Emir of Kuwait went to kind of have a diplomatic chat with the Saudis, the big thing they made an issue is that they wanted all like Al Jazeera shut down. And you know why? Because they don't want any of that kind of negative publicity that comes out of that. So in reality, all this is about probably ultimately is they want Qatar to shut down the media outlets. Now,
Yeah, like Al Jazeera and all that, right?
yeah, because at home, Saudi Arabia is very weak internally. There's divisions even within
I mean, 30% of the
the House of
population
Saud.
is in abject poverty, Paul.
Yes, exactly. And of course, what's the oil price done to the Saudis? All it's done is created this imbalance in the trade deficit, and they're now talking about having to have taxation and God knows what else. So Saudi economically is weak, politically it's weak. Now, but of course, in the process of all this going on, the the Qataris not going to shut Al Jazeera down. So the Saudis are just now starting to not only look weak on the international stage, but internally, more importantly, they look weaker than ever, which any of their detractors, and the thing with the House of Saud is not only you say, well, there's enemies of the House of Saud, the House of Saud itself is deeply divided, and there's a big, huge power struggle brewing beneath the surface as to certain parties who want to take over, and therefore that's just going to, therefore I think also you'll find that within the House of Saud there'll be people who've approved this action against Qatar, and there's others who won't. And of course, now it's backfiring on that's just going to create even more divisions. So the rhetoric will continue, but Saudi's opened up this Pandora's box in the Middle East, and they're just furiously digging their own grave day on
They're
day in
digging
day
their
out.
own
And of course,
grave, and they're throwing grenades in there with them after they dig the grave.
yes, and anything else that's explosive while they're at it. Now, of course, what's interesting with respect to the Qataris is they've come out today and made a very interesting comment going, well, it was the Qatari central bank said, you know what, we're economically fine. We've got sufficient foreign currency reserves. We'll survive this. Well, basically issuing the challenge to the Saudis going, are you going to survive this? And the reality is no. I mean, what are they going to do? Back down? They'll be just the laughing stock of the Middle East. If they don't back down, what are they going to do? Get sucked into a war they'll never win, and it'll bankrupt them anyway in the process. And now, of course, Qatar's been very diplomatic, very polite. They haven't reacted. They haven't said to the GCC nations, "Oh, we're going to retaliate and take sanctions out." And no, but what have they started to do? They've played the game very cleverly, and I would suspect, no disrespect to the Qataris, but I think the conversations they've had with the Russians will have made a big difference because, for example, today they've said to the International Civil Aviation Authority regarding these measures against Qatari flights, they've said, well, as far as we're concerned, this is an illegal act and you need to take action. And this is the clever way to do it. You've gone past the point that in probably even 10 years ago, maybe less, this whole Qatari thing would have erupted into this gigantic war. And I'm not saying there isn't the risk it could still happen. But we're seeing not only in this multipolar world, but a different perspective. Look, we don't need to go to war anymore. It's like the Russians with the Ukraine. You don't go to war. You just let these deep state capitalists destroy themselves because they're very good at doing that if you don't do what they want you to do. And by taking a backseat and not getting involved in that kind of rhetoric, the Qataris are now asking perfectly legitimate questions as to, well, are these moves to ban flights legal? And no doubt you can pursue that with regards to any naval blockade. Well, of course, the naval blockade that they were suggesting they were going to do fell apart very quickly, seeing as the Iranians have been bringing in hundreds of tons of food, were like no problem into Qatar. So, I mean, so it's all a lot of hot air rhetoric, but what's kind of interesting and is not only from that, but we're hearing some interesting comments. We'll talk about Macron in a bit more detail because they had the French presidential elections, but with regards to Qatar, he's come out and said, we can't have this war. You're going to have to reconcile the differences. Apparently, he's had a series of calls with the Emir of Qatar. He's also spoken to the Saudi king, also to Erdogan and the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, which is obviously in the UAE.
Yeah,
and it looks
the Maktoum family, right?
Yeah, and his foreign minister's supposed to be holding talks today with the Qataris, and it's all about, no, we're not having a war. We're going to diffuse this, and it's the end of it. Now, Germany equally is absolutely livid. I mean, and they're as angry as they are with the Saudis and the UAE, but they're also furious with Washington because, from their perspective, they regard that Washington really was fan the flames because Trump came out in his recent visit and pointed the finger at Qatar, accusing them of funding radicalism and extremism. And Berlin thinks that the US is stoking tensions in the region, and of course their foreign minister Gabriel, he met his Saudi counterpart, and apparently the Qatari sheikh is supposed to be meeting Merkel not for quite a while, but so we'll see what comes out of that. But of course, Germany sees indirect blowback themselves in terms of investments, because Doha's made in quite a, they've got investments in Volkswagen, Deutsche Bank, Siemens, and
Yeah.
they're worried is that it may curtail business in Doha of in other aspects that is going to backfire on the Germans. So they're pretty furious about it. And they're not backing the kind of Washington, although it's a bit hard to say who is Washington these days, because you've got the Trump Washington aspect, you've got the deep state Washington, and so we have to be careful when we say Washington, but certainly they're opposing and publicly opposing any military type action that's going on. You've also got the Pakistanis. They've been off to see the Saudis, saying, look, you're going to have to contain this situation. We're not having a war. There was some lie actually said that the Pakistanis had deployed troops to Qatar, and that's not true. That was no idea where that came from, but that's not true. You've got also, the Iraqis rejected the Saudi and UAE media claims that there was this $500 million ransom paid by Qatar to some armed groups in Iraq to secure the release of 26 kidnapped Qatari. I'm not sure what you refer to, mercenaries, whatever, but apparently they've said that the money is received by the Iraqi government and the sum's still in the Iraqi central bank, and if you want to come and see it, will prove that the transaction never occurred. So they're getting angry, and there's it's this reflection of this change in the Middle East, where in the past this would have just escalated very rapidly and we would have had another war. And this time there's nations coming out in the region and beyond the region, such as in Europe and Pakistan, who are saying enough's enough. We've had enough of this, and we don't want another war. And that's the big kind of sea change. But it'll be interesting more. We have to keep an eye on what's going on in Qatar, but I'm thinking it's going to be kind of more interesting going forward to see exactly what the fallout is for the Saudis in this regard. Because I think now the fact that Washington's backed away from the Saudis and said, we're not going to support you, and we're certainly not going to support you in a war. Right. If you want a war with the Qataris and inadvertently, obviously, with the Turks and the Iranian, be it on your own head. But given the size of the nation and the amount of borders they've got, they're a sitting duck. But I think that's the thing. The Saudis have had this arrogance and their ignorance that they're somehow this strong, powerful nation in the Middle East. And the other interesting point in all this conversation, I've not heard Netanyahu say anything. It's like, again, Netanyahu, he's flexing his muscles with regards to Palestine again and making some pretty outrageous comments. But with regard to this matter and to do with Saudi and everything, he's just saying nothing, even though obviously inadvertently Iran's mixed up in all this. So I think it's an extremely interesting situation, but the whole kind of Turkey-Saudi aspect is something that's possibly not that obvious to a lot of people, but that's an added dynamic that's really stoking tension, because as much as we may say the Saudis despise the Iranians, and they equally despise the Turks just as much, and that's not necessarily that well known by people.
Yeah, it's incredible. If there's any more of a proof positive to see where the U.S. is these days in terms of their power projection, they're not brokering anything. They're, apart from the deep state running around blowing things up here and there and running false flags and dropping bombs on the Syrian army and showing up wherever in the world that terrorists need help. If you're a terrorist and you need help and you're about to be bombed to oblivion, maybe you can call the U.S. Air Force. That's what it's come down to. Apart from that, Paul, there's no brokering or leadership by the United States anywhere. And it just shows you that the cabal's done. They're done.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're absolutely done. As we said, I've said many times before, the war's over. The difference is, the war's over in the sense, but you're still going to have these, incidents where they're going to throw bombs and whatever else, because they're still capable of doing that, and any person dying as a result of that is hugely regrettable. And I'm not trivializing things, but you're absolutely right compared to what they were on the world stage. A matter of a few short years ago. They've completely lost all authority and legitimacy, and that's a good thing. And but obviously, there's still going to be huge problems as a result of that. But I think it's a good point. I meant to mention a bit about Comey. I don't want to go into labour too much about what went on, but I think there's an angle in with Comey, and that's kind of interesting because we know, before he was removed from office by Trump, if he'd felt he needed a special counsel to investigate the Russian influence in the election, he could have just gone and said to Congress, I want one, and they'd have done it. And if he felt his conversations with Trump warranted additional attention, he could have approached the Attorney General and resolved it, but he didn't. So he didn't think there was a need for a special counsel until the day he was fired. Now, of course, we know that he's also turned all the memos about his conversations over to the special counsel upon termination. So this Mueller investigation, we'll talk about Mueller in a moment because there's an interesting angle that came out about him. Apparently they've got all the information they need. But the one thing that is interesting with Comey is he revealed that he orchestrated this public release of information about his private conversations with Trump because he wanted to further the investigation, i.e. to make this special counsel happen. So after his firing, he actually tried to obviously spur this kind of special counsel's appointment by giving this damning memo that he'd written about a meeting with Trump to this friend to release into the media. Bearing in mind, all he did was, you and I could have this private conversation and I could write anything I wanted about what you said and then publish it, take it to the media. That proves nothing. But of course, all he was trying to do is play the mainstream media as another opportunity to attack Trump. Now, of course, we know why he's doing it because it's just purely vindictiveness. Now, of course, the stupid thing is he exonerated Trump on the Russian question because he got asked, was there any kind of investigation about the president underway, and was the president under investigation at the time of his dismissal? And under oath, he said no. So in essence, he's vindicated Trump in the process. Now, throughout his testimony, he's given this glowing reference about Mueller as, he's one of the great guys of America and he's the right person to lead the Russian investigation, which kind of suggests okay, why was he appointed? Now, in simple terms, Comey was fired. He leaked this private material, as we said, to the press, so he could get effectively someone he trusted appointed as a special counsel in order to take retribution on Trump. And frankly, this special counsel, in reality, has it got anything to do with the rule of law? Has it got anything to do with an actual investigation? No, it's Comey looking for some vengeance, and he's trying to oust the president, who, as we know, whether people believe it or not, is taking a wrecking ball to the deep state or cabal. Now, of course, Mueller was appointed by the Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein. Now, there's allegations that came from this NSA whistleblower called William Binney, and he's claiming that Mueller violated the US Constitution as the FBI director by using secret domestic spy programs where it wasn't allowed. So he said that he used this spying program at the NSA against common crimes since 2001. And there are statements that apparently Mueller admitted this in a 2011 interview. I can't verify this, so I'll have to say allegedly, in a 2011 interview with Times magazine. Now, Binney says that Mueller's willingness to use this kind of espionage technology designed only for national security functions against people in regular criminal investigation shows that he ignores or breaks the safeguards in the US Constitution. So therefore, that places some doubt as to regards the impartiality and Mueller's ability to do the job. And of course, interestingly, we had Trump's attorney saying that the Espionage Act states that leaking information about a US president or meetings with the president on national defense matters is illegal. So Comey's kind of implicated himself. And he obviously said these private notes were based on classified conversations, clearly wholly illegal. So Comey must have known this. So why send them to a friend before they went to, I think it was the New York Times? So you have all these problems. You have the issue with Flynn. Now, the question is, if there was all these problems going on with Flynn and Trump, why didn't someone say to Trump, I'm sorry, this is unacceptable? And then there's this idea, well, there was an intent for him to stop having this investigation into Flynn. Well, apparently that he gets some idea of intent from that, but he didn't get any understanding of intent when Hillary Clinton destroyed 30-odd thousand emails. He couldn't see the intent there, but apparently there's an intent based on a conversation where he interpreted something. So once again,
Exactly.
it shows a major problem. Then, of course, you've got Comey throwing Loretta Lynch under the bus by saying that he was instructed to refer to an issue as a matter and not an investigation into, obviously, Hillary Clinton. Now, when you stack all this up, oh, and interesting, apparently Trump said he's prepared to give evidence under oath regarding this matter. Well, if that's the case, he must have a damn watertight case. Otherwise, if he lied under oath, he's just impeaching himself. So,
Right.
I mean, there's another angle. Now, of course, the question is, why would Comey do all this? Well, I think
He's a
it's a
criminal.
question of, yeah, I think Comey, but it's back to the fact the deep state know, or the cabal know, they're in serious trouble. And Comey knows he's up to his neck in things. So he's turning around going, well, if I publicly come out and admit to something, and if I throw a few other people under the bus, maybe I can just start to do a public plea bargain in a set. But then privately, I'll try and wrestle my way out of the major problem. I mean, and I suspect, I mean, why else publicly admit you've broken the law? Why say, well, actually, I've done something that is illegal, unless you thought there was a way you could wriggle out of it? And this is the thing that's going on with these kind of deep state cabal type characters, is all they're going to do is throw each other under the bus. And in the
Right.
process of him throwing whoever under the bus, they're going to then try and retaliate and throw him under the bus, and it's going to be more and more mud being hurled in at each other. So I think that's his motivation. Otherwise, why would you just come out and publicly admit you've broken the law? I mean, because the reality is, unless he really thinks, oh, I'm fireproof and full, and no one can do anything to me, so I can say what I like, and there's no repercussions. Well, I slightly suspect he doesn't think that, but I can't say for certain. And then, of course, this is not going to die a death. And then what do we see? We had Preet Bharara, who was the former U.S. attorney who got fired by Trump.
Yeah.
Apparently, he said in a television interview on Saturday that there's absolute evidence to begin a case of obstruction of justice against the president. And then in the next breath, he said, it's very important to be clear that no one knows right now whether there is a provable case of obstruction, while simultaneously claiming there's also no basis to say there's no obstruction. I mean, what kind of comment is that? That's like saying, well, someone might be guilty, but we can't say they're innocent. I mean, the rule of law is you're innocent till proven guilty. And then,
Correct.
now, why has he come out and said this now? I mean, this is the first time he spoke since he was fired by the Trump administration, for reasons none of us know, and we can't really comment on that.
Right.
Now, of course, the interesting thing is he commented on this congressional testimony of Comey and said that, he agreed with Comey that the disputes, the nature of conversations he had with the president. So in a sense, he's coming out backing up Comey in the process. Now, once again, if he thought that Trump was saying anything inappropriate, why didn't he report the matter to the Attorney General? Why are all these people now coming out at this moment and then defending each other? Well, because it's partly vindictive, and it's also, I think, there's an element of fear. But the truth is, the whole Russia thing's fallen apart, and the whole idea of impeaching Trump on the basis of this is fallen apart, because if they admit there's no investigation into it in any way, shape, or form, then the whole Russia thing has got absolutely nothing to do with it. And if they still imagine that the Russians were involved in rigging the election, well, why do they also admit, well, no, it didn't affect any of the voting? If they were involved rigging an election, you would have to influence the voting in some way. So that's not the case either. But the whole thing has absolutely fallen apart. And it's rather like what the Saudis did in Qatar. They came out with this thing, they tried to make these accusations, and rather like the Saudis it's blown up in their face through their own stupidity. The same thing's happening with these people. Like Comey, he's come out, made all these accusations, made all these statements, and now he's had to back off and backtrack and admit his culpability in something that is illegal. So again, it's another example of where the cabal deep state are just imploding, and I think it's extremely interesting that what happens going forward with regards to Comey. But I mean, Do we think Loretta Lynch is going to take this line down, the accusation made against him? What's going to be the issue to do with that? And are they all going to start throwing each other under the bus? I think very much so.
It's funny, and people will say, "Well, why do they do this?" I thought they're this vaunted secret society type people that move forward with all their plans and schemes with mathematical precision. The truth of the matter is, these people don't have ideals. The Chinese, the Russians, the rest of the world, the awakened masses have ideals. They have goals. They have aspirations. These people, when you've surrounded yourself around a mantra of death and destruction, and what you can do to pilfer, what you can do to pillage, what you can do to whatever scam you want to run, you have no ideals. It's that old proverb, Paul. There's no honor among thieves.
Absolutely, and in a way that's beneficial to all of us,
Yeah,
because they will. I mean, the thing is, there's this idea that they've all had this unified approach. There isn't. A lot of them hate each other,
of
and
course.
they'd stab each other in the back if they thought they could progress as a result of it. So when the writing's on the wall, they will be vicious and ferocious with each other, and in a way that's a good thing, because again, everyone always had the idea. I remember people years ago saying to me, why don't they just, someone just take an army and take the cabal out? And I said, you can't do that. You can't fight the cabal. What you have to do is just, you check, like Russia and China, they started to change the world in a positive way. And as a result of it, it had a negative impact on the cabal, who then started to make crazy decisions and destroy themselves. And ultimately, it has to be about them destroying themselves, not someone trying to leverage that point. Because here's the situation. If Russia went steamrolling into the Middle East, okay, they've been involved in Syria and they couldn't argue that. But if they started getting involved in Qatar militarily, that gives the cabal a perfect excuse to vent spleen on the Russians. And the Western world are going to buy it, but by Russia playing the diplomatic role, and it destroys them, because they can't cope with anybody who doesn't react in kind in terms of going to war with them. And that's what they desperately want. And in the process of not doing that, it's weakening them, and they're making more and more harebrained, crazy decisions, which is weakening them and destroying them in the process. And that's, they had to ultimately defeat themselves, because throughout history, that is exactly what all these huge empires did. The Roman Empire destroyed itself. It wasn't destroyed by a powerful force that took it
Yeah,
out. It just
they rotted
imploded
from
by
within.
itself. Yeah. And it's the same in all empires. They eventually destroy themselves through arrogance and ignorance, and and ultimately treating the very people who make that empire with utter contempt. And of course, in the end, it collapses. Now it's different times. We're not in the times of the Roman Empire, but in a sense, that's precisely what's happening. They're destroying themselves, and therefore it's self-evident for the last few years, everything they've tried pretty much is blown up in their faces. And again, what's happening in Qatar is blowing up in their face, and it's not going to succeed, because the strength of Russia and China in that regard, and how they're building this multipolar world, is that all these nations who are coming under their umbrella are going, hang on, we can actually come out and publicly say we're not approving this anymore. We're in the past. They wouldn't dare say anything because they felt weak. And it's the strength of that multipolar world which is also very damaging to the cabal's interests, because they no longer can enforce that view, because it's the old thing, it's safety and strength in numbers. And that's precisely why building the One Belt, One Road, building the AIIB, and all these other mechanisms were put in place to give these nations strength and to have a common purpose where they could work together. And in a sense, that provided this buffer, which is why the cabal are doing her brain thing, because they're getting more and more desperate, because the rest of the world's getting stronger and stronger without actually having to go to war with them.
Yeah, right. Exactly correct. Exactly correct. Um, it's truly remarkable, man. So what's going on the UK front? I mean, you guys have a lot of just had this crazy situation having a parliamentary election when you don't need one. What's the latest update?
Okay, well, people know we did half an hour on Friday, went into
Yeah,
detail. Well, effectively, what's happened is with regards to the UK, yeah, the Theresa May's formed this coalition government with the Democratic Union Party, or Unionist Party, which gave her just enough to scrape through the 326 majority. However, it's far from the end of the problem, because the risk is, I mean, Corbyn's smelling blood still and thinks there could be another election in autumn or early next year. He might be right. There was some delay today regarding I mean, it's not the Queen's speech. The government gives the Queen this speech, but it has to be approved and verified. And there's rumours there's problems with that, which might mean that the Conservatives having huge problems. And if they can't get that through, kind of makes the whole purpose of their government farcical, and in itself might lead to another election. But what, of course, is interesting is you've got all the people on the left who think, well, if Corbyn gets elected, it's the end of Brexit. And that's what they really, I think that's what a lot of them voted for. Well, a lot of students voted for him because he'd scrap student tuition fee. And a lot of people voted because they thought, oh, he'll scrap Brexit. Well, he's publicly come out again for about the 50th time and said, I'm not against Brexit. We have Brexit happening. Come what may, it's how we go about it. I have a different viewpoint from the Conservatives, but ultimately it's going to happen. So that should put that one to bed. But interestingly, Merkel on the back of the election has said, we want speedy talk. She's actually wanting to speed things up even faster regarding the whole Brexit process coming about. Now, speeding up doesn't mean it's going to happen in 2 minutes or 2 months. But the fact is, this also puts to bed this idea that May throws the election, so Brexit won't happen. And the reason why would Germany want Brexit? Because they know the European Union's dead and buried, and if Britain can get out of the European Union in a sort of seamless manner, relatively speaking, rather than brute force when the European Union collapses, it will help Germany ultimately in the same process. Yeah. So for sure, that's why Merkel's really pushing the boat and saying we need to get these talks going. And even though she must realise that the UK's current electoral system is very precarious, we'll see what happens. I mean, probably the Queen's speech will get approved, but I think that Theresa May's Conservative Party with this small coalition with the DUP is going to struggle, and Corbyn might be absolutely correct. But I think if people think, I mean, Corbyn's, as I said, he's got laudable ideas, but how is he going to finance this? I cannot for the life of me see anywhere how he's going to balance the books. And I'm very apolitical. In fact, you might call me a political atheist when it comes to party politics. But I know in my lifetime, every time eventually a Labour government's gone out of power, they've bankrupted the country. I mean, in 97, sorry, not in 97, in 2010, when they lost the election. I mean, apparently the Treasury left a note to the Conservative Party going, good luck, we've spent all the money. So, and
How of course, did that happen?
Well, because they do spend, but of course, and equally where the Conservatives go wrong is because they then just have this massive austerity, which is completely wrong. So I'm not defending either party. I've got no interest in either. And frankly, they're both useless, and we need a real political system. But the point is, Corbyn, if he can balance the books and spend all this money, he'll be an absolute genius. I'll be the first one to congratulate him. But seriously, I don't think that's possible. So, yeah, the UK is in a bit of a mess at the moment. I mean, Brexit will happen, but it'll probably happen because the European Union dissolves, as we said before. So I think that's where we are. There's no real great progress. I mean, I think they'll struggle to form any policy decisions because they're going to have to water everything down because they are so weak. So in that sense, that can be a good thing because most of their policies are completely ridiculous, the Conservatives, and I don't support any of them. But equally, there might be measures that need to be approved and they won't get approved. So in the end, the whole government becomes stymied and becomes completely ineffectual and can't achieve anything. And therefore, maybe it won't happen this autumn, but an election's kind of is probably on the cards, I guess, sooner rather than later, and certainly not 5 years from now. So that's regard to that. I think that regarding France, it's worth mentioning. Obviously, they had the first round of these elections, which is the Parliament elections, and apparently they've got to vote. I mean, you think the UK system's complicated. The French system's even more complicated. They have to elect these 577 lawmakers to what they call the lower house of Parliament. And anyway, Macron, they had the vote. Macron got the biggest. He got 32%, and then the next biggest party was the Republicans. They got about 21.5%, and Marine Le Pen's National Front Party got 13%. Now, The gist of it is there's the second round's on the 18th, and it's so complicated as to how it all works. Now, Marine Le Pen herself can proceed to the second round because she's got the requisite number of percentage points in her own kind of constituency. But the issue is they're now projecting that Macron, in the end result in a week's time, is likely to get 3/4 of the 577 seats that are in the French Parliament. Now, that's a huge surprise, and it's also quite interesting that Le Pen's party is just capitulating. And as if to exemplify the fact of these parties capitulating, in Italy, they've got this huge Eurosceptic five-star movement party who apparently in the national polls are running neck and neck with the centre-left kind of Democrat party there, which is led by Renzi. And then you've got some lesser parties, Berlusconi's back and this other guy, Salvini, and they're kind of trailing in their wake. Now, Italy at the weekend had these local municipal elections. Now, this five-star movement vote was just collapsed. I mean, they didn't make the runoff vote in numerous districts. I think they only made the second round vote in one southern Italian city. Now, and this on paper is a huge defeat for them.
Yeah.
And really what these municipal elections are supposed to give is an indication of what will happen in the national polls. Now, apparently people have got rather fed up with the five-star movement because apparently they haven't exactly covered themselves in glory in terms of local governance, and that's had this negative effect on these municipal elections. So, because apparently this vote's around, I don't know how many voters there are exactly in Italy, but it's about 9 million voters in 1,000 towns and cities. So it's kind of almost like an exit poll before you have your national elections, which may even happen in autumn of this year, possibly sometime next year. But once again, what's kind of strange is we're seeing no appetite for Le Pen and very little appetite for this five-star movement. Now, we'll see what happens when it comes to the national elections. But it's kind of interesting that when push comes to pull, people are still very, very skeptical of voting for these minority parties. I mean, and it's like UKIP's votes completely collapsed. Well, that's not entirely surprising in the UK, but it's interesting how Le Pen's vote, I mean, what's she going to get? Maybe 10 seats out of these 577? It's very much a minority party and not a lot's changing. Now, the jury's still out with Macron. His moves to do with the Middle East are interesting. There's a lot of concern, I think, within France, but perhaps the most damning indictment of the French election. And it's as much as he's got 32% and was the biggest party, only 48% of the electorate turned out for this vote. I think that's a clear indication that the French have had enough of all politicians. I mean, because that is, the UK was 70%, which is quite high for the election, but 48% shows the French have just disillusioned, and it doesn't really see that it's a glowing reference to Macron. Macron's seen as the best of a very bad bunch of candidates, including in people's eyes Le Pen. Now, people will get frightened and go, "Oh, well, these populist parties are not coming to the fore. It's the end. The cabal are going to win." Absolutely not. But what it shows in the mind of the people is they still don't trust the kind of more minority and not mainstream political parties. And what's happened in France and Italy are clear examples of that.
Yeah, absolutely. What about the situations? What's the latest on the gold market? What are you hearing on that end with China and Russia?
Okay, well, yeah, gold. Well, there's kind of some interesting thing. What did surprise me, we know that Russia and China have got 30,000 tons of gold, and they continue to buy up huge amounts of gold where possible. What I didn't realize is that Iran has got about 15,000 tons as well. That came as a bit of a shock. I heard that at the weekend.
15,000 tons?
Yeah, the Iranians.
Wow.
Yeah, that came as a bit of a surprise. But
the United States has 8,000 tons in Fort Knox. Did you know that?
Yeah, 8,000 tons of fresh air.
Yeah, 8,000 tons of fresh air. You got that right. But we have deep storage gold.
Yeah, it's
it hasn't
so
been
deep.
Discovered yet. It's deep.
No, it's at the Earth's core. It's molten.
Yeah, that's why it's deep.
No, I mean, by all accounts, there is at least one barrel with a few kilo bars in Fort Knox, so they're not exactly totally destitute. But no, I mean, it's just the same process. I mean, someone sent me a thing that Andrew Maguire was going on in 26 days. There's supposed to be the paper market supposed to blow up and
That's
gold
not
and
going to
silver will
happen.
go through. No,
Yeah,
no,
it's not
exactly.
gonna
I
These
mean,
guys,
it will happen. It will
right?
happen not because of that. The plain simple fact is the gold and silver physical price doesn't represent the paper price. If you want to go and buy, I mean, not saying anyone is, but if you want to go and buy a ton of gold, you're going to pay a massive premium, or even half a ton now.
Ridiculous
And
premium, twenty
I mean, you're
percent or
talking
north
double
of
the
it.
price. Yeah, maybe double the
Yeah,
price even. Now, in terms of the paper market, it's rather like anything. You can't destroy the paper market because, it wouldn't matter if suddenly there was a massive surge and China bought of every ounce of physical metal in the Western markets. They can just go and dump $100 billion worth of paper contracts in 10 seconds like they do. And well, they don't do 100 billion, but they've done 10 billion or 5 billion. They can control the paper market, but the paper market's become an irrelevance. The fact is, the price will go one day. Yes, the paper market will destroy itself, but it's certainly not going to sort of sense that there's going to be this massive need for a delivery of physical metal because they can settle their contracts. They may say, someone might say, well, do you know what? I want all my physical metal delivered based on these paper contracts. And they legally can just say, no, we'll settle in paper, we'll settle in dollars. And they can't do anything about it. So you can't say to the COMEX and the LBMA, we demand physical delivery and you've got to, because they'll just say, no, we'll settle in paper. So, or in dollars. So therefore it becomes an irrelevance. But for sure, the paper market one day is going to blow up very badly. Of that, there's no doubt. And the pressure's increasing day by day. But the idea that somehow physical delivery is going to blow the paper market up, it's not going to happen because we've seen this enormous physical delivery of metal going word from west to east, and also for that matter, within the West, there's nations buying up quite a lot of gold and silver in that regard too. But it's not going to make any difference. They can just keep smashing the price. So no, I don't
right.
see any imminent reason. I mean, yes, something may happen, but I don't think it will happen for that reason. And it could happen in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 20 weeks. We don't know. And it doesn't matter ultimately whether it happens in that period of time or doesn't. The point is, eventually, the paper market will eviscerate, and then you'll get true price discovery. Of course, it does help that the Chinese have got true price discovery as much as it can be, because obviously the problem you can't have in the East is that they could just let the brakes off and say, well, an ounce of gold's now $1,800 an ounce, and you get this huge arbitrage between the West and the East. But once again, they don't want to be seen to the people blowing up the markets. That's not how the Russians and the Chinese work. They'll say, do you know what? If you want to trash the market and make it cheap, great, we'll just keep buying it. And that's exactly what they've been doing for many years. And of course, they produce a huge amount internally within their own nations, so they don't have to worry about the aspect of declaring any of that. So this idea, well, China's only got this much gold and Russia's only got this much gold. They don't declare things. They don't declare any
Exactly.
internal production, and they produce huge quantities
Biggest
on an
producer in the
annualized
world,
basis.
biggest consumer in the world, the biggest importer of the world. I mean, you name it. They are number one in every category when it comes to gold.
Yes, and also they're also doing it in silver. And I mean, so therefore, I'm not too concerned. I don't pay much attention. I mean, it's interesting. The only thing that is interesting on is someone certainly doesn't want gold to go over $1,300 an ounce currently, because every time it gets close, and it did last week, they smash the
Right.
price again.
Correct.
And of course, correspondingly, so someone's desperate now, and this is why, as I say, the issue is there comes a point where the paper market will kill itself, and it's rather like an idea that the cabal destroys themselves in the process. The more they keep trying to suppress the price, eventually they're going to destroy themselves in the process, and they will do it, and that day will come whenever it is. And I don't frankly care one way or the other when it happens. I mean, yes, in a way, if it happens sooner, then if you're a gold and silver holder, then you're going to benefit. But ultimately, I don't see these, holding gold and silvers, it can be an investment, but also it's a hedge and a protection against anything like hyperinflation or any other problems down the track. So it's not per se, I mean, yeah, people can trade it, and they did very well in 2011 when it went to 1900, and some people made a fat killing in the process, and good luck to them. But
Yeah.
there's more to it than than just being a way of making a quick buck out of selling it. But for sure, it'd be re-rated at some point. But I don't see the idea that, I mean, maybe in 26 days something will happen, but I don't believe it's necessarily for that reason. But time will tell. But for sure, the markets remain very buoyant globally. People, nations keep buying it up, and they will do while it's cheap. But also even within the UK, the small retail in bullion dealers are selling stuff very, very quickly. I mean, as fast as they get in, it's going out the door, and that's gold and silver.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, you are seeing more retail interest in it, but of course, a lot of retail interest is now shifted to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies because people see that as a
Yep.
way, they're seeing far more progress. And that's the thing, people like to invest in things or because they see a massive increase in the price quickly, and of course that's going to make it attractive. But it remains to be seen as there's an awful lot of cryptocurrencies out there, and rather like in the early days of the internet, how many of them are going to survive in the future? In 2 or 3 years' time, how many of the ones that are around today will exist? I don't know, but what you can certainly say 2 and 3 years' time from now, the whole cryptocurrency industry and how it works will be very, very different than it is now. As any early technology always does, it evolves. The internet evolved. We had all the dot-com era, and that didn't work out particularly well for a lot of companies, but some survived, some thrived and became very strong, and that's where the space we're in now at the moment.
Right.
And it is going to be hugely volatile. So you're going to see this kind of volatility, and that can scare a lot of people in the process too. But none of us have a crystal ball as to exactly, but the Russians are showing huge interest. They've got a more of a long-term view on cryptocurrencies, and but as I said, I'm just talking about it. I don't have any investment in it. I'm not pushing it. I never have bought into it. I'm not saying you shouldn't. That's just my personal view, and I'm not saying people should do one thing or the other. But I talk about it because it's hard not to mention it now in the context of what's going on, because there is a lot of interest in it globally, and we're seeing nations. I think the Philippines is the latest one that's given it kind of legalized it in a sense. So nations will continue to do so and show interest, but blockchain technology is here to stay, and that
Absolutely.
really is in its infancy, and we're already seeing more and more interest across the world of people using it in the financial sector because they see, and it is brilliant technology. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
It is
Absolutely agree.
phenomenal, and it has a multitude of applications in the process. So, no, I'm interested in it. I keep an eye on it. I'm interested in the technological advancements and people. I read a lot of the white papers for Bitcoin and other coins out there because I'm interested, and of course I'd be foolish not to be interested in it. But at this stage, for me, I'm a little bit nervous of it because it is so volatile, and I don't like investing in things that are that volatile. I've done trading in the past on things that have been hugely volatile, and it can get quite nerve wracking doing it. So, but certainly that doesn't detract from the fact that cryptocurrencies are here to stay. I do think that, but I think they will evolve, and in a few years' time, we'll look at them and go, "Wow, that is radically different from the way they are now, and how they're implemented."
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. With that being said, Paul, why don't you plug your website, your subscription services yet again, and your closing comments, sir?
Okay, well, closing comments. It is a very fast-paced, hugely evolving world, and things are changing very rapidly. We just have to keep an eye on everything. I know it's not easy. That's why we do these. Why V and CJ, they do the things they do, and I do what I do because we want to try and get an understanding of what's going on. We can't look at everything in isolation. You can't look at, well, I can't look at what's going on in the UK and think that gives me an indication. We have to have a very global perspective because that's how things are unfolding. So just keep an eye on everything and follow the people who give you reliable information and give you a considered opinion as to what's going on and backed up by solid information. And that's the way to go. There's a lot of people out there for me who are saying a lot of things, but a lot of it's noise. And I'm not criticizing anybody in particular. I don't get involved in disagreements with anybody. But for me, there are people out there who are saying a lot of things, and they're rather distracting people from what's going on, and that's difficult
I agree.
for all of us who are involved in that process. In terms of the website, it's obviously thesiriusreport.com. We've got, yes, the premium content page, and we'd very much like you to subscribe. We think it's very good value for money, and thank you to everyone who has subscribed and all the positive feedback we've had from people who appreciate it, and we really appreciate that, and we'd like more people to subscribe, obviously, and I think for $1.75 a month is very good value. We kept it cheaper because we believe that the volume of numbers matters more than charging double or treble the price, and I think
I
that
mean,
is
your whole
legit.
service is worth $300 a month, man. To be quite honest with you.
Well, that's very kind of you to say.
Yeah,
We've got the YouTube channel. We put something out which got quite a bit of interest to do with Germany and the EU. I asked, the YouTube channel's London Paul. Go and check it out if you haven't already listened to it, because it's only 5 minutes, but I think it's a very interesting angle from a legal perspective to do with Germany and the EU. So we've got
absolutely.
that. We've got the Facebook page, which doesn't. I think it's interesting. I was talking to some at the weekend. Facebook seems to not really getting. It's almost like it's staggering now. It's like reached saturation point where there's an awful lot of groups and people are spread so thinly across them. So, but we've got the Facebook page and people contribute to it. We'd like people to contribute more in a discussion sense, but obviously we've got that, and we've got Twitter at thesiriusreport.com.
And Paul, spell Sirius Report so people will know. Otherwise, they'll.
Okay, yes, that's SIRIUS report, all one word.
Got it. With that being said, folks, thank you all for listening in, and be back here next week for another Sirius Report with the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, London Paul. With that being said, we're over and out. Take it away, CJ.